The massive doors of the Galactic Council chamber burst open as alarms blared throughout the space station. Representatives from hundreds of different worlds sat frozen in their seats as the emergency signal cut through their peaceful afternoon, meeting like a knife through butter. High Admiral Vextar, a towering figure with 6 arms and glowing purple eyes, rushed to the center of the chamber. His normally calm voice cracked with urgency as he activated the holographic display above their heads. The image that appeared made even the bravest warriors in the room step back in horror. A swirling mass of dark energy was growing larger and larger in the Kepler 442 system. The ancient weapon looked like a giant black hole, but worse, much worse. Red lightning crackled around its edges, and with each passing second, it grew bigger and hungrier. "This is the Omega Maze," Vextar announced, his voice echoing through the silent chamber. "It has been sleeping for over 50,000 years, but something has awakened it. Exactly 25 hours, it will be large enough to destroy 12 inhabited worlds." The math was simple and terrifying. 12 worlds meant billions of innocent lives. Families having dinner, children playing in parks, students studying for exams. All of them completely unaware that death was racing toward them at the speed of light. Counselor Threx, whose crystal body usually sparkled like diamonds, had turned, a dull gray with fear. She had lived for over 3,000 years and had seen many terrible things, but nothing like this. Her voice was barely a whisper as she spoke. 47 different species have tried to stop this weapon before. The smartest minds in the galaxy have studied it for thousands of years. The strongest warriors have thrown themselves against its barriers. Every single one of them failed. The chamber fell into an even deeper silence. Everyone knew the stories of the Omega Maze. It was not just a weapon, but a puzzle wrapped in deadly energy fields. The ancient race that built it had designed it to be impossible to solve. It required not just intelligence, but a way of thinking that seemed to be beyond any known species. The weapon's energy field was already interfering with all the technology in the system. Spaceships could not use their faster-than-light drives. To escape, communication systems were failing. Even the most advanced evacuation plans were useless because no one could get close enough to the planets to help. As the reality of the situation sank in, panic began to spread through the chamber like wildfire. Representatives started shouting in dozens of different languages. Some demanded immediate military action. Others called for evacuation attempts, despite the impossibility. A few simply sat in stunned silence, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the disaster. Then, in the middle of all the chaos, a small voice spoke up from the back of the chamber. A delegate from one of the smaller worlds raised a tentacle hesitantly into the air. "What about the humans?" The effect was immediate and dramatic. The entire chamber fell silent again, but this time it was a different kind of silence. It was the silence of creatures who had just heard something that both terrified and intrigued them. Humanity was the newest member of the Galactic Council, having joined only 50 years ago. In that short time, they had already earned a reputation that made other species nervous. Humans did not think like anyone else. They did not follow the same rules. They approached problems in ways that seemed completely insane to other species, yet somehow often worked. Other species would spend years carefully analyzing a problem, creating detailed plans, and following proper procedures. Humans would look at the same problem, ignore all the rules, and try something completely unexpected. Sometimes they failed spectacularly, but sometimes they succeeded where everyone else had failed. A collective shudder ran through the assembly as they considered this possibility. The humans were unpredictable, dangerous, and absolutely impossible to understand. But they were also the only species that had never been tested against the Omega Maze. The quantum transmission crackled to life aboard the human embassy ship, cutting through the peaceful afternoon like lightning through a clear sky. Ambassador Jiho was in the middle of reviewing trade agreements when the urgent message from the Galactic Council arrived, carrying with it the weight of 12 worlds about to die. Most species would have reacted with immediate panic or formal emergency protocols. The Zephyrians would have called for prayer. The Crystalline Collective would have begun calculating evacuation probabilities. The mighty Corvan Empire would have started mobilizing their war fleets. But Jiho's reaction was purely, unmistakably human. His eyes lit up like a child who had just discovered a new toy. The same look that had driven humans to climb the highest mountains, dive to the deepest ocean trenches, and eventually reach for the stars themselves. "This is fascinating," he muttered, scrolling through the technical data about the ancient weapon. "Send me everything you have on this thing. I want every scan, every failed attempt, every theory anyone has ever had about how it works." The alien diplomats on the other end of the transmission exchanged worried glances. They had expected fear, demands for immediate evacuation, or at least some acknowledgement of the terrible danger. Instead, they were watching a human treat the galaxy's greatest crisis like an interesting puzzle. Within minutes, Jiho had activated Earth's emergency response protocols. But instead of calling for the military, the scientist, or the diplomatic corps, he did something that would have seemed insane to any other species in the galaxy. He started making phone calls to people who had absolutely nothing to do with galactic politics or ancient weapons. The first call went to Minho, graffiti artist who spent his nights painting elaborate murals on the walls of Seoul's subway tunnels. Minho had never been in space, had never seen an alien, and thought quantum physics was something that happened in science fiction movies. But he had an eye for patterns that could see connections where others saw only chaos. The second call reached Salman, who was in the middle of a professional gaming tournament. She was known across Earth for her ability to find shortcuts and exploits in video games that their creators never intended. Her fingers could move faster than most people could think, and her mind worked in ways that turned impossible challenges into winnable games. Doyen answered his phone between sets at a jazz club in Busan. He was a pianist who could improvise melodies that made people cry, who understood rhythm and harmony in ways that went beyond music into something almost mathematical. He had never heard of the Omega Maze, but he knew how to make order out of chaos. Hejin was finishing an 18-hour shift in the emergency room when her phone rang. She was a trauma surgeon who had saved lives that everyone else had given up. She knew how to stay calm when everything around her was falling apart, and she understood that sometimes the most desperate situations required the most creative solutions. The last call went to Woojin, a demolition specialist who had spent his career figuring out how to make buildings fall down in exactly the right way. He understood structures and weaknesses, and he knew that sometimes the best way to solve a problem was not to fix it, but to break it in a very specific way. When the Galactic Council's military advisor saw the list of humans that Jiho had assembled, his reaction was immediate and horrified. "You're sending entertainers?" he asked, his voice cracking with disbelief. "A street artist, a video game player, a musician, a doctor, and someone who blows things up for a living. The fate of 12 worlds depends on this, and you're treating it like some kind of joke?" Jiho looked at the alien with the patient expression that humans reserved for those who simply did not understand. "We're not sending entertainers," he said quietly. "We're sending humans. That makes all the difference." The human transport ship emerged from its jump near the Kepler 442 system. And the first thing that struck everyone was how wrong everything felt. The space around the ancient weapon shimmered with an odd energy that made reality itself seem unstable. Stars in the distance flickered like dying light bulbs, and the massive structure ahead of them defied every law of physics they thought they understood. But inside the ship, instead of the terrified silence that had marked every previous expedition, there was laughter. "Did you see that alien's face when we asked for snacks?" Minho was saying, sketching patterns in his notebook while looking out the viewport. "I think we broke his brain when Salman asked if they had energy drinks." "Hey, I need my caffeine," Salman replied, not looking up from her handheld gaming device. "You can't expect me to save the galaxy without proper fuel." The contrast was striking. Every other species that had approached the Omega Maze had done so with formal ceremonies, prayers to their gods, and the weight of history pressing down on their shoulders. They had sent their greatest scholars, their most decorated warriors, their wisest leaders. Each expedition had been treated like a funeral procession. because everyone knew they were probably watching their heroes go to their deaths. The humans, on the other hand, had turned the journey into what felt like a road trip with friends. They had spent the travel time sharing stories, playing games, and treating the mission like an adventure rather than a suicide run. As they got closer to the weapon, the alien guide who had been assigned to them became increasingly nervous. Commander Zalthar had witnessed 3 previous attempts to breach the maze. Each time, he had watched brave souls disappear into the energy barriers, never to return. The responsibility of guiding another group to their likely deaths was weighing heavily on him. "The structure you see before you," he began in his most formal tone, "is the culmination of precursor technology. It has stood unconquered for over 3,000 years. 47 different species have attempted to solve its mysteries. Each expedition was composed of the finest minds their civilizations could produce." Minho looked up from his sketching and studied the massive structure floating in space. It was beautiful in a terrifying way, like a geometric storm made of energy and metal. Patterns shifted and flowed across its surface, creating designs that seemed to hurt the eyes if you looked at them too long. "Looks like a really expensive escape room," he observed casually, as if he was commenting on the weather. The alien guide's jaw dropped. An escape room? This was the most feared weapon in the galaxy, and the human was comparing it to a form of entertainment. Salmon leaned forward to get a better look at the structure, her gamer instincts already analyzing what she was seeing. "I've seen worse boss fights," she said, cracking her knuckles in preparation. "What's the respawn timer if we mess up, Commander?" Zalthar's face went pale. "There isn't one," he whispered, horrified by their casual attitude. "If you fail, you die. If you die, 12 worlds die with you. There's no second chance, no restart, no do-over." The humans exchanged glances, and instead of the fear that the alien expected to see, their faces broke into identical grins. It was the kind of smile that had made other species nervous about humanity for 50 years. It's the expression of people who had just heard that something was impossible and decided to prove everyone wrong. "Even better," Wujin said, his demolition expert's mind already working on the problem. "No save scumming means we have to get creative on the first try." "Wait," Haijin added. "Does this mean we're going in completely blind?" "No walkthrough guides. No strategy forums. No YouTube videos showing us how other people did it?" "That's correct," the alien guide confirmed, completely missing the excitement in her voice. "Outstanding," Doyan said, his musician's ear already picking up the subtle harmonics coming from the weapon. "I love jazz for the same reason. The best performances happen when you throw out the sheet music and just improvise." Commander Zalthar realized he was dealing with something completely outside his experience. These humans were not just unafraid of the impossible challenge ahead of them, they were excited about it. They were treating the galaxy's greatest crisis like it was the most interesting game they had ever encountered. The human transport ship drifted closer to the ancient weapon, and the view through the windows was both breathtaking and terrifying. The Omega Maze hung in space like a giant mechanical flower made of impossible angles and shifting lights. Energy patterns danced across its surface in ways that made your eyes water if you stared too long. But inside the ship, the atmosphere was completely different from what anyone expected. Instead of the hushed reverence that had marked every previous expedition, the humans were chatting like they were heading to a weekend camping trip. "I still can't believe they don't have proper coffee out here," Salman was saying, taking a sip of the alien beverage that tasted like burnt plastic. "How do you save the galaxy without caffeine?" "Maybe that's why all the other attempts failed," Minho replied, not looking up from his sketchbook where he was drawing the weapon's shifting patterns. "Inadequate breakfast preparation." The alien guide, Commander Zalthar, watched this exchange with growing horror. He had been present for 3 previous attempts to breach the maze, and each time the atmosphere had been like a funeral. Teams of the galaxy's greatest minds would spend the journey in meditation, prayer, or intense study. They understood they were probably going to their deaths. These humans were making jokes about coffee. "The structure before you, Commander Zalthar," began in his most serious voice, hoping to impress upon them the gravity of the situation. "Represents the pinnacle of precursor engineering. It has remained unconquered for over 3 millennia. 47 different species have sent there. finest warriors and scholars to challenge it. Every single expedition has ended in failure. Minho finally looked up from his drawings and studied the massive structure floating in the void. It was beautiful in a dangerous way, like a storm cloud made of geometry and lightning. The patterns on its surface shifted and flowed like living things, creating designs that seemed to exist in more dimensions than the eye could process. "Looks like a really expensive escape room," he observed. Tilting his head to get a better angle on the structure, the alien guide's translator unit made a strange choking sound, as if it couldn't believe what it was being asked to translate. An escape room? This was the most feared weapon in galactic history, and the human was comparing it to a form of entertainment? Salman leaned forward in her seat, her gamer instincts automatically analyzing what she was seeing. The way the patterns moved, the timing of the energy pulses, the geometric relationships between different sections, it all reminded her of the complex boss fights she had mastered in countless video games. "I've seen worse boss fights," she said confidently, cracking her knuckles in the way she always did before a challenging game. "What's the respawn timer if we mess up?" Commander Zolther felt his blood turn to ice. "There isn't one," he whispered, horrified by their casual attitude toward death. "If you fail, you die. If you die, 12 worlds containing billions of innocent lives die with you. There is no second chance, no restart button, no opportunity to try again." The humans exchanged glances, and instead of the fear and solemnity that the alien expected to see, their faces lit up with identical grins. It was the same expression that had made other species nervous about humanity for decades, the look of people who had just been told something was impossible and decided to prove everyone wrong. "Even better," Wujin said, his demolition experts mind already working on the problem like a three-dimensional puzzle. "No, save scumming means we have to get creative on the first try." "Wait," Haijin added, looking genuinely excited. "Does this mean we're going in completely blind? No instruction manual, no strategy guides, no videos showing us how other people solved it?" "That is correct," Commander Zolther confirmed, completely missing the enthusiasm in her voice. "You will have only your wits and whatever equipment you can carry." "Perfect," Doyan said, his musician's ear already picking up the subtle harmonics emanating from the weapon. "I love improvisation. It's the best jazz happens when you throw away the sheet music and just feel the rhythm." Commander Zolther realized he was witnessing something completely unprecedented. These humans were not just unafraid of the impossible challenge ahead of them, they were genuinely excited about it. They were treating the galaxy's greatest crisis like it was the most interesting puzzle they had ever encountered, and somehow, that made him feel the first spark of hope he had felt in years. 12 hours had passed since the human team entered the Omega Maze, and they had made progress that shocked everyone watching. Where other expeditions had spent months just understanding the basic structure, the humans had already solved 6 of the 7 major puzzle sections. Their unconventional approach was working in ways that defied all logic, but now they stood before something that made even these fearless humans pause and take a deep breath. The final barrier rose before them like a wall made of pure mathematics. It wasn't just big, it existed in dimensions that human eyes couldn't properly see. The air around it shimmered and twisted, making reality itself seem uncertain. Energy patterns flowed through spaces that shouldn't exist, creating puzzles that required solutions in 17 different dimensions at the same time. "Well, this is new," Minho said, his artist's eye trying to make sense of patterns that seemed to change every time he looked at them.
Right.
"It's like trying to draw a picture that exists in places that aren't really there." His breath. "I've blown up some complicated buildings in my time, but this thing has structural supports in dimensions I can't even pronounce." The alien observers watching from their safe distance felt their hope beginning to crumble. They had started to believe that maybe, just maybe, these crazy humans might actually succeed. But this final barrier was different. It wasn't just difficult, it was impossible in a way that went beyond normal impossibility. "The Crystalline Collective spent 400 years working on this puzzle alone," Commander Zolther whispered into his communicator. "The Corvin Empire's greatest military minds studied it for 3 centuries. Even the wise ones of Andromeda admitted defeat after 2 millennia of effort. Previous expeditions had discovered that this barrier required not just intelligence, but a type of thinking that seemed to be beyond any single mind. The puzzle existed in 17 different reality planes simultaneously, and each plane had to be solved at exactly the same moment, with perfect coordination between all dimensions. It was like trying to play 17 different chess games at once, while blindfolded, against opponents who could change the rules of each game whenever they wanted. Jiho stood in the center of the team, studying the readings that flowed across his portable scanner. Numbers and equations cascaded down the screen like digital rain, each one representing a different aspect of the impossible challenge before them. His mind worked through the data, looking for patterns, connections, anything that might give them a way forward. Then something clicked. "This isn't just a puzzle," he said quietly, his voice carrying a note of wonder and realization. "It's a test of collective intelligence. The precursors didn't design this to be solved by one brilliant mind or even a small team. They designed it to be solved by an entire civilization working together." The team clustered around him, understanding dawning on their faces. Every other expedition had approached the maze with their best and brightest, but they had still been thinking in terms of small groups. Even the largest previous expedition had numbered only a few hundred individuals. "So we need more brains," Haijin said simply. "A lot more brains." "How many more?" Doyan asked, already understanding where this was going. "All of them," Jiho replied. "We need to turn this into a problem that all of humanity can work on together." The alien observers began their evacuation preparations, convinced that even humanity could not overcome this obstacle. How could they possibly coordinate the entire human species to work on a single problem? The logistics alone were impossible. The communication delays would be insurmountable. The cultural and language barriers would make cooperation impossible. But Salman was already pulling out her quantum communication device, her fingers flying across the interface with a speed that had made her a gaming legend. She had that same focused expression she wore during the most challenging boss fights. The look of someone who had just figured out how to exploit a game mechanic that everyone else had missed. "Time to phone a friend," she announced, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who had never met a challenge she couldn't turn into a game. "Actually, time to phone a few million friends." The quantum channels opened, connecting directly to Earth's global communication network. Within seconds, Salman was broadcasting on every available frequency, social media platform, and gaming network on the planet. "Attention Earth," she said, her voice carrying across oceans and continents. "We've got the ultimate boss fight here, and we need all hands on deck. This is not a drill. This is the real deal. And we're about to show the galaxy what humans can do when we all work together." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Millions of humans around the world stopped what they were doing and turned their attention to the most important puzzle in galactic history. What happened next was something that had never been seen before in galactic history. While other species had always approached problems with careful planning and formal hierarchies, the humans did something that seemed like complete chaos, but was actually the most organized effort ever attempted. Summon's fingers flew across her communication device as she set up multiple live streams simultaneously. Within minutes, she had connected to every major gaming platform on Earth: Twitch, YouTube Gaming, and dozens of smaller networks that catered to different gaming communities around the world. "All right, Earth," she announced, her voice carrying the energy of someone who had just discovered the ultimate boss fight. "We've got a 17-dimensional puzzle that needs solving in the next 12 hours, breaking it down into smaller sections and streaming each part to different gaming communities. Puzzle gamers, you get sections 1 through 4. Strategy gamers, you're handling the tactical elements. Speedrunners, I need you to find the exploits and shortcuts." The response was immediate and overwhelming. The gamers who had been competing against each other for years suddenly found themselves working together on the same team. Chat rooms exploded with theories, strategies, and solutions. People who had never met in person began collaborating across continents and time zones. Meanwhile, Minho had set up his own communication channel with art communities worldwide. He was quickly sketching the visual patterns of the weapon's energy, flows, translating the impossible geometry into something that human artists could understand and interpret. "Look at these patterns," he said, his hands moving rapidly across his tablet as he created simplified versions of the 17-dimensional designs. "There's something here that reminds me of fractals, but more complex." Every art school, every design studio, every creative community I can find. Within an hour, artists in Paris were analyzing the color patterns. Designers in Tokyo were working on the geometric relationships, and street artists in São Paulo were seeing connections that trained mathematicians had missed. The global art community had turned the ancient weapon into the ultimate collaborative artwork. Doyen had connected with musicians around the world, broadcasting the weapon's harmonic patterns to conservatories, recording studios, and even small-town garage bands. The ancient device was generating sounds that existed in frequencies beyond normal human hearing. But when translated into audible ranges, they revealed patterns that made musical sense. "This is incredible," he told the growing network of musicians listening in. "It's like a symphony written in 17 different keys simultaneously." Jazz musicians in New York, can you work on the improvisation sections? Classical orchestras, I need you to analyze the formal structure. Electronic music producers, you're our experts on frequency synthesis. DJs in Berlin began mixing the alien harmonics with beats that revealed hidden rhythms. Children's choir in Kenya discovered that singing certain sequences in harmony created resonances that matched the weapon's energy patterns. Even a heavy metal band in Australia found that their distorted guitars could replicate some of the more complex frequency combinations Haijin had established communication with medical professionals worldwide, understanding that the biological implications of the weapon's energy needed to be considered. Emergency room doctors, researchers, and even veterinarians were analyzing how the different dimensional frequencies might affect living tissue. "We need to understand how this energy interacts with biological systems," she explained to the growing network of medical professionals. If we're going to solve this puzzle, we need to make sure our solution doesn't accidentally harm the billions of people we're trying to save." Medical researchers in Switzerland began running simulations, while doctors in India analyzed the electromagnetic effects on human brain patterns. Even veterinarians joined the effort, providing insights into how different species might be affected by the weapon's energy fields. Wujin had connected with engineers, architects, and construction workers around the world, sharing his analysis of the weapon's structural vulnerabilities. His demolition expertise was being combined with the collective knowledge of people who understood how to build and destroy complex structures. "This thing has weak points," he announced to the growing network of engineers. "I can see places where the energy flow creates stress fractures in the dimensional structure. Civil engineers, I need you to calculate load-bearing requirements. Demolition experts, help me figure out how to create a controlled collapse." Within hours, millions of humans were working on different aspects of the same problem simultaneously. It was chaos in the most beautiful way possible. There was no central authority, no formal hierarchy, no complicated bureaucracy. Instead, there was something that other species had never seen before: an entire civilization. Treating potential extinction as the ultimate collaborative challenge, gaming communities were sharing solutions with art studios. Musicians were collaborating with engineers, medical professionals were working with construction workers. Language barriers disappeared as people used mathematics, art, and music to communicate across cultures. The alien observers watching from their safe distance were witnessing something that defied everything they thought they knew about how intelligent species should behave in a crisis. It looked like complete chaos, but it was actually the most organized effort in galactic history. The moment had arrived. All across Earth, millions of humans were sitting at their computers, phones, and tablets, waiting for the signal that would begin the most important coordinated effort in human history. In bedrooms and offices, in schools and coffee shops, in laboratories and art studios, people who had never met were about to work together to save 12 worlds. Salman sat at the center of it all. her fingers dancing across multiple keyboards. As she managed real-time coordination with people across 6 continents, her gaming experience had prepared her for this moment. She had coordinated massive online raids before, but never with stakes this high. "Okay, Earth," she announced, her voice carrying to millions of listeners. "We're going live in 60 seconds. Gamers, you're handling the dimensional locks. Artists, you're managing the pattern sequences. Musicians, you're on frequency control. Engineers, you're monitoring structural integrity. Everyone else, you're our backup and verification team." The countdown began. 59 seconds until they would either save the galaxy or watch it burn. Jiho stood before the weapons control interface, his hands steady, despite the magnitude of what he was about to attempt. The ancient precursor technology responded to his touch, accepting him as the conductor of this impossible orchestra. Screens lit up around him, showing energy readings from 17 different dimensions simultaneously. All systems showing green, he reported, his voice calm despite the chaos around him. "The weapon is accepting our connection. We're ready to begin the overload sequence." Doyen had positioned himself at the harmonic control station, his musician's training about to be tested in ways he had never imagined. He was about to conduct a symphony across multiple dimensions, with millions of people as his orchestra and the fate of the galaxy as his audience. "Musicians worldwide, I need you to listen to my signal," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent years leading jazz ensembles. "We're going to play 17 different songs at the same time, and they all need to end at exactly the same moment. Trust your instincts, trust your training, and trust each other." What happened reached zero. What happened next was something that had never been seen before in the history of the galaxy. Across Earth, millions of humans began working together with a precision that defied belief. Gamers in Seoul were coordinating with artists in Paris. Musicians in New York were harmonizing with engineers in Mumbai. Children in schools were solving puzzles alongside grandparents in retirement homes. The weapon's energy field began to respond immediately. The ancient systems, designed to resist any attempt at conventional solution, found themselves overwhelmed by the sheer volume and variety of input they were receiving. It was like trying to drink from a fire hose. There was simply too much information coming too fast. Summons screens lit up with updates from around the world. Dimensional Lock 7 is responding to the Seoul Gaming Team's solution. Pattern. Sequence 12 is being handled by the Paris Art Collective. Frequency Cascade 3 is locked in by the New York Jazz Ensemble. The alien observers watching from their safe distance could hardly believe what they were seeing. The massive weapon that had stood unconquered for millennia was beginning to shake and vibrate as its systems struggled to process the unprecedented assault of human creativity. "Energy field destabilization has begun," Commander Zelther whispered into his communicator, his voice filled with awe. "The weapon is experiencing systematic overload across all 17 dimensions." Gaiho's readings showed the weapon's ancient systems fighting against the coordinated human effort. Energy levels were fluctuating wildly as the precursor technology tried to adapt to inputs it had never been designed to handle. "The weapon is trying to counter our approach," he announced. "It's adapting to our solutions and creating new barriers." But humanity had anticipated this. The beauty of their crowdsourced approach was that they had backup solutions for every possible scenario. As soon as the weapon adapted to one approach, millions of humans switched to a different strategy. Artists worldwide switched to pattern. "Set B," Minho called out, his fingers flying across his tablet as he uploaded new visual sequences. Musicians were moving to harmonic sequence gamma. Gamers implement the alternate solution paths. The weapon's energy field began to pulse erratically, its ancient systems overwhelmed by the constant adaptation and creativity of the human assault. What the precursors had designed as an impregnable fortress was crumbling under the chaotic but perfectly coordinated attack of an entire species working together. Doyen watched his harmonic readings as 17 different dimensional frequencies began to synchronize. "We're achieving resonance across all planes," he announced. "The harmonic cascade is building to critical levels. The weapon's energy field began its controlled collapse, exactly as Wujin had predicted. The ancient barrier that had stumped civilizations for millennia was finally yielding to humanity's refusal to accept that anything was truly impossible. 37 minutes remaining, Haijin announced, her voice carrying relief and wonder in equal measure. The death field is dissipating. Energy levels are dropping to safe parameters. The galaxy held its breath as the impossible became inevitable. Humanity had done something that no other species had ever accomplished. They had turned the galaxy's greatest crisis into the ultimate collaborative achievement, the ancient weapon. Powered down with a sound like a massive sigh, its energy field collapsing into nothing as the countdown timer showed 23 minutes remaining. For the first time in over 50,000 years, the Omega Maze went completely silent. Its deadly purpose finally ended. Across the galaxy, billions of beings who had been preparing for death suddenly found themselves with a future again. On the 12 worlds that had been marked for destruction, people looked up at their skies and saw stars that would still be there tomorrow. Children would grow up, families would stay together, and civilizations would continue their long journey through the cosmos. But the real change wasn't in the weapons shutdown. The real change was in how the galaxy would never look at problems the same way again. The Galactic Council Chamber was completely silent as the implications of what they had witnessed began to sink in. For thousands of years, they had operated under the assumption that some problems were simply unsolvable. The greatest minds in the galaxy had established lists of impossible challenges that were considered beyond the reach of any species. Now, in the span of a single day, humanity had proven that the word impossible was just another word for nobody has tried the right approach yet. Commander Zalthor stood before the assembled delegates, his voice shaking with emotion as he delivered his report. The humans did not solve the Omega Maze, he announced. They refused to accept that it needed to be solved in the first place. Instead, they broke it in the most beautiful way possible. The delegates murmured among themselves, trying to understand what this meant for their own civilizations. Every species in the galaxy had their own list of unsolvable problems. Ancient mysteries that had puzzled their greatest thinkers for millennia. But now, those problems didn't seem quite so impossible anymore. Jiho was still receiving messages on his communication device when the team boarded their transport to return home. The requests had started arriving before they had even left the weapons site, and they were still coming in at an incredible rate. The Crystalline Collective wants us to look at something called the resonance paradox, he said, scrolling through the messages. The Corvin Empire has a strategic problem they've been working on for 2,000 years. The wise ones of Andromeda are asking for help with quantum consciousness research. Every message was the same. Civilizations that had spent centuries or millennia on problems they couldn't solve were suddenly willing to try the one approach they had never considered, asking the unpredictable humans for help. How many requests do we have so far? Haijin asked, settling into her seat as the transport prepared to depart. 17 different problems from 12 different species, Jiho replied, and more are coming in every few minutes. The team exchanged glances. Had come to this mission thinking they were trying to save 12 worlds from destruction. They'd ended up changing the fundamental way the galaxy approached impossible problems. What's next? Minho asked, already sketching ideas in his notebook. The artist in him was excited by the possibility of turning galactic mysteries into creative challenges. Jiho continued, scrolling through the requests, his expression growing more amused with each message. The Andromedan paradox needs solving, he said. Apparently it's a problem involving consciousness existing in multiple dimensions simultaneously. There's something called the temporal knot that's been bothering the wise ones for 10,000 years. A temporal knot. Salman perked up, her gamer instincts immediately intrigued. That sounds like a puzzle involving time travel or causality loops. I love those kinds of challenges. The Builders Guild wants us to figure out how to construct stable wormholes, Jiho continued. Merchant Federation has a logistics problem that spans 37 different trade routes. And someone called the Eternal Watchers has a philosophical question about the nature of existence that they've been debating for 50,000 years. Doyen laughed. A philosophical question? That's not even a technical problem. That's just a conversation that needs a fresh perspective. The quantum archaeologists want help deciphering precursor technology, Jiho added. The void dancers need assistance with something called reality stabilization. There's a group called the Star Shapers who want to know if we can help them move entire solar systems. Wu Jin whistled. Move solar systems? That's not demolition, that's construction on a scale I've never imagined. The requests kept coming. Problems that had been considered impossible for thousands of years were suddenly being presented to humanity like interesting puzzles waiting for creative solutions. The galaxy had discovered that humans didn't just solve problems differently. They refused to accept that problems couldn't be solved at all, so Salman said, cracking her knuckles in the way she always did before a challenging game. Does anyone want to bet we can solve the Andromedan paradox in a weekend? The team looked at each other and grinned. They had just saved 12 worlds in 24 hours by refusing to accept that something was impossible. A weekend seemed like plenty of time to solve a problem that had only been bothering people for 10,000 years. I'll take that bet, Minho said. But I think we can do it in a single day if we get the art communities involved. Make it 12 hours, Doyen added. I have a feeling the musicians are going to find patterns in consciousness that the philosophers missed. The age of human unpredictability had begun, and the galaxy would never be the same.